I am back for another live. Welcome, everybody. Now, with these lives, I don't always advertise them well enough. Checking my stream strength here. I don't always give notice. I think it's just my type B personality thing going on. I'm doing my best to be as consistent as possible. But sometimes I just don't know when I'm going to go live and then I just go live. But I'm going to be using the live format just because it feels a bit less overwhelming for me because when I record, I have to edit and I don't have a lot of time to do that. And in the next 2 weeks, we're also going to be traveling back overseas. So some things are going to be shifting and I might not be as available, but I will always be here. I just don't always tell people, I don't give people enough notice, but I don't know, it's just the way it is. If you subscribe and you hit the notification bell, you will always know when I go live. So just do that to stay in touch with me and with all the things that are happening. Man, I will say the world is just getting more and more interesting, isn't it? But I always think of this whenever there's a lot of chaos, what follows is transformation. So keep that in mind as the world gets a little bit more. It seems like it's getting crazy, but just keep that in mind that like transformation is coming as a result of all this chaos. Okay. Um, but yeah, so we're going to get started. I was waiting for a few folks to come in. And if you're watching this and you're part of the replay gang, definitely let me know in the comments. But we're going to be talking about decisions. So this is part two. No, is this episode two? Yes, this is episode two of a five-part series. Okay. Um, Let me see here. 1 second, yo. Did it. Just making sure my tech is okay. I don't know if, let me know if y'all can hear me. All right. I think I'm good to go. I really think I'm good to go. Oh, Lord, there's something else happening. Okay. All right. Just checking all the tech stuff. Anyway, I think I'm good to go. Um, 1 second. Oh, you can hear me. Okay, thanks, Toy. I appreciate it. I like to make sure because I don't want to start going and then ain't nobody hear nothing. But anyways, this is part two of a five-part series that I'm doing. And hopefully it's helpful for y'all. And if you have any questions, definitely leave them in the comment section, the chat, email me, all the good things, and I'm happy to answer them. All right. And this today is all about decision making, which I feel like is a thing that a lot of us get stuck on. Like, how do we make the best decision? How do we make the right decision? And that can keep us from actually moving forward. So I hope the guidance in this live will actually help give you a bit more direction and a bit more encouragement to move forward. So, most people think that the reason they can't make decisions is just fear of the unknown, fear of making the wrong choice, fear of what others will think. But what I'm about to show you isn't just fear. It's something much, much deeper. Yes, definitely fear is a huge part of what makes decisions feel as hard. But we're not one dimensional. We're complex human beings with sometimes complicated layers and complex stories. And so it's really important to look at the whole instead of just the bits. All right. And so maybe you're sitting with one of those impossible decisions right now, right? Do I leave the relationship? Do I take the job? Do I move across the country? Some of you I know are trying to move overseas. And you've been maybe spinning on it for weeks, maybe months, some people even years, right? Because every time you try to choose, you try to make a decision, it feels like you're being pulled in completely different directions. So that makes the decision making that much harder, was gonna check the chat. Ah, thanks. And partners in the chat. I appreciate the support. So here's what's really making it feel impossible. It's not just that one person trying to make this one decision. There's literally a war going on inside you between different versions of yourself, right? One part wants safety, another part wants freedom, and a third part might even want to keep everyone happy. And if that sounds like you, definitely let me know. But that I could see how that could be very difficult. And I've definitely experienced that myself. And so that's why it feels really impossible to decide. So it's not just fear, right? It's that you're asking multiple selves to agree on one choice. And let me let you in on a little secret. They rarely do. Different versions of yourself rarely agree on everything that is going on in your life. And that can cause a lot of confusion. Um, Kenya says number three. Yes, definitely can relate to that. But before we get started, I do want to take a moment to just speak directly to those of you who are new to this channel, Define Resistance. You know, the channel's been growing steadily, and I don't take that lightly. I'm genuinely grateful, not for just the numbers, but for the depth of energy I feel that's actually being built here. And I feel like a lot of things are just starting to take root in a very authentic way. So thank you. Thank you for being curious enough to click and for being open enough to stay, right? And so some of you have been walking alongside me for a while now. You've watched sort of the space evolve through different seasons of my own life and work. But if you're just finding me for the first time, I just wanted to take a moment and say welcome. My name is Francis, and my background is I'm a clinical therapist and a coach. And this channel is where I help self aware souls move through some of the resistance in their lives with clarity and self trust without the pushing, the performing, and definitely without the burning out portion. And I say that not some sort of like slogan that I walk around across my chest, but as someone who just kind of lived that life, I know what it's like to do all of the right things and still feel stuck, to want change so badly and still feel something deeper just kind of like pulling you back. And that's the tension that this space was born from. And it's where we sort of get honest about what's actually underneath all of that resistance, the old survival strategies, the unmet emotional needs, maybe the fractured self trust. And it's where we begin the work of moving differently. Again, not harder, definitely not faster, but at least more truthfully and as honestly as we can. And and most importantly, more courageously, more in tune with who we actually are, not who we thought we had to be, right? So if any of this speaks to you, if you're in the season of transition or even grief or healing, if you're craving clarity that doesn't come from like that checklist thing, and if you're just looking for a space that meets you where you are, but doesn't leave you there, right? You're in the right place. So welcome to Define Resistance. We're not here to chase a version of healing that looks great on paper. We're here to just move through the messy middle, to listen deeper, and to just return to ourselves, right? And if that resonates, hit the subscribe button and just stick around. We go deep from here, and I'm just really glad that you're here. So I just wanted to take a moment and share that with you. And I'll always be checking back in the chat as well. But we'll get started in a second. Got to drink some water. So all right, so maybe there's a decision that you've been putting off, right? And every time you try to make that decision, something feels a little off, like you're missing a piece of that puzzle. And so whatever way you used to make those decisions, maybe back in the day, whether you had a clear system or just went with what felt right, maybe none of it is working anymore, right? Maybe you used to trust your gut or always chose the logical option or asked yourself, maybe like, what would my mom do at this moment? Or hell, maybe you even had a what would Jesus do bracelet, right? But now logic says one thing and your gut says something else and your heart wants something completely different. It's almost like having maybe three GPS systems all pointing in different directions. Let me know if that sounds familiar in the chat or in the comments if you're watching the replay. So maybe you do what everyone else does, right? You make a pros and cons list, and sometimes that tells you nothing. Maybe you Google how to make life decisions at 2 a.m. Maybe you don't Google anymore because you got AI now. Maybe you're using ChatGPT as a life coach or a therapist, and you're asking them, what should you do? Maybe you ask your friends what they think, right? And then immediately know their answers isn't yours. Even if you got an answer from ChatGPT, you're like, that sounds pretty good, but I don't know if that actually resonates with me. And what happens is that, like, everyone tells you it's just fear. Like I said earlier, again, fear of the unknown, fear of making the wrong choice. Sometimes it's really fear of judgment, fear of how that might change your social and cultural status as well. And yeah, again, like I said, fear is a huge part of it, but here's what's really making it feel impossible, right? You're not just one person, again, trying to make one decision. There are literally different versions of you with different priorities. And you're asking, again, all of them to agree. And so that's why it feels impossible. You're not indecisive. You're literally navigating an internal negotiation. And until you understand what each voice is really asking for or asking of you, you'll kind of just stay stuck in the middle. And if you've been stuck on the same decision for weeks or months, let me know in the comments. I think you're about to understand why your confusion is actually intelligence. Sometimes we judge ourselves for feeling a little bit confused, and so we don't share that with other people. And so I don't want you to judge yourself anymore. There's a higher intelligence at play. And so you'll learn what to do when it's not just your mind that needs clarity, but it's also your identity just trying to catch up with all the things that are happening within you, right? And all this is going to make sense as we kind of move along tonight. Let me check the chat. Okay, we're good there. So when you tell people, I'm sorry, so when you tell people that you're stuck on a decision and they tell you, again, trust your gut, make a pros and cons list. What would your future self do? And one of my personal favorite is, follow your passion, follow what feels right. And, again, that sounds all helpful. But maybe you try those suggestions and instead of feeling clearer, you just feel more confused. I hope that sounds familiar. I wonder if it sounds familiar. But now, if you watched the last video about why you feel lost during life transitions, we talked about outgrowing an old version of yourself. Well, here's where that really gets really interesting. This is exactly why decision making feels impossible now. If you missed that one, it's worth going back to because this all builds on that foundation. So each video has a build up. And so once you watch the first one all the way to the fifth one, eventually it's all going to be really cohesive for you. But here's the thing that nobody talks about. When somebody tells you to trust your gut only works when your gut is actually calibrated, right? But when you're in transition, your gut is speaking a language that you're still learning. The version of you who trusted that old intuition was navigating different fears, different values, different everything. And so that pros and cons list isn't really necessarily going to work. Sometimes it does for others, right? Um, but it's like building a new house with the old bricks from the last house. You've heard that metaphor before, but it's true, right? And so there needs to be something a little bit different as you approach making those kinds of decisions. And what really happens is pretty sneaky. You automatically default to how you've always made those decisions. Maybe you've always been the responsible one. So you choose what's safe, right? Or you've always been maybe the people pleaser. So you choose what makes others happy. But those patterns, again, they were built for the old you, not the one that's actually trying to come through. Okay. And so here's the deeper problem. All that advice assumes you know who you are. I always tell clients it's really hard to make decisions if there isn't a foundational piece of knowing who you truly are. It doesn't mean you need to know everything because we're constantly evolving, we're constantly growing. But some people will want to make decisions, but they don't even know what they actually value. what is the compass that leads them. And it's really hard to make any decisions if you don't know some of those foundational pieces. And so if you're not making decisions from that steady foundation, your decision making is going to be like that GPS that's always saying recalibrating, reroute, because you're trying to decide also while you're actually changing. I hope that makes sense. So, no wonder it feels impossible, right? It's like asking someone mid metamorphosis to predict who they'll become. And so the transformation is still unfolding. And so remember all that advice I had listed in the beginning. And here's what they all have in common: they assume you're the same person who started this journey, but you're not, right? And that changes everything about how you approach decisions. Okay. And I'm going to share a little story about my own personal mishaps. But I'm a Libra, yes, and I take astrology with a grain of salt. But as a Libra, if any of my fellow Libras know, that we're known to be indecisive, and I rebuke that now. And I just feel like we're careful with how we make our decisions, so we don't spend time on things that just it's going to take up too much mental capacity. So we're like, I don't know, ask me something else, right? If you're a Libra and you understand this, let me know. But decisions weren't just hard for me in the past; they were actually pretty paralyzing. And again, I grew up in this household where having my own opinion wasn't just discouraged; it was actually dangerous for me to have that. So I never learned what psychologists will call self-efficacy, and it's just a fancy term that basically says the confidence that you can trust your own judgment and handle whatever life throws at you. So if you didn't develop that as a kid, you're always gonna be like second guessing yourself. Maybe um, you're always gonna outsource your own wisdom to someone else. And so you can see how tricky it all can be and why it's so important to begin building that self trust muscle, which we're going to talk about a little bit later. But anyway, so for years, I was that person who would stand in the cereal aisle for 20 minutes, paralyzed by which box to choose. I mean, granted, that's still kind of happening now. I'm still on that aisle once in a while, wondering or scrolling. I know, like me and my partner were ordering food. I'm just like scrolling on the DoorDash app or something like that, or whatever app we're using, trying to decide. So, I have to say it's still kind of there sometimes. But back in the day, like every decision used to feel like life or death for me because I had, again, no internal compass. I didn't know which voice was mine and which belonged to everyone else who'd ever had an opinion in my life, right? And the cost of that, I was living everyone else's life except my own, right? I was miserable, but at least I was safely miserable, you know? You know those folks, at least they're safe. I always say it's an illusion of safety. We feel like we're safe, but we're actually not, right? Um, and so it feels easier to stay in that safe bubble that we created for ourselves versus stepping outside of that because we don't know what's out there. So we're safely miserable. Um, but then, along the way, something just kind of clicked, right? I realized that staying stuck was actually destroying me faster than any wrong decision ever could. And that paralysis was really the real killer. Let me know if that sounds familiar for you, where you're kind of at this point where, like, man, I just need to make this decision because if I stay in this place, it's actually going to just be that much more worse for me. So I started an experiment. Began to just kind of like force myself to make decisions, small ones at first, without having all the information. And, not all of them went my way, as so life does, and some worked out, and, most were kind of like in that middle space. But the thing that I discovered was that I actually could handle it all. And I feel like we're born with all the internal resources that we need. We just have to discover what those are. And the only way that we're going to discover what those are is by taking those risks, right? There's nothing anyone outside of us can give us. So I just want you to definitely keep that in mind. I see the chat moving. All right, Toya's saying that's where she's at. Thank you for sharing, Tori. But yeah, we can handle a lot more than we think. Some of us have probably handled too much, right? The one person that carries it all, you know, just because we carry it all doesn't mean that it's not heavy. So there could be a bit of a complicated nature of that, but we do have all the internal resources within us to get through some of these challenging moments. But, somewhere along the way, my voice got louder than all the others because I decided to just take those tiny risks. Sometimes they were bigger risks. Sometimes I'm somebody who is more of like the rip the band-aid off kind of person versus tip my toe in. So a lot of the decisions I did make were like, they're like totally upheavaled my whole entire life kind of decisions. But that kind of works for me. You have to find your own intensity rhythm, I say, because like some people have to work with whatever their nervous system can actually hold, right? So now when I'm facing a big choice, I don't ask what's the right answer or the best answer. I ask what would honor my truest self without all the fear and judgment. I have to move away from all the fear and judgment, but like how can I honor myself in this moment? And when you ask that question versus like what's the best answer, you get a lot more clarity and you feel more connected to whatever that decision might be, and you'll feel and see it a lot clearer than focusing on the decision itself. And for some folks who are still kind of like understanding themselves, it still might be a little bit cluttered. But when you continue to practice it, even in a smaller scale, which we're going to talk a little bit later, it does start to open up a little bit. Okay. Let me check the chat. I think it's um, moving, afraid of making the wrong decision. Yeah. And that's a lot of people. Everyone's afraid of making the wrong decision. Um, but, decisions are just feedback. And so I always say it's better to get the feedback as quickly as you can because then you can make those adjustments. But if you don't ever get the feedback, you can't ever make those adjustments, right? And so sometimes we have to start small. We have to start where our nervous system is because sometimes if it feels too paralyzing, it'll just backfire on us and then we might retreat 20 steps versus one step. Okay. So quitting my job as a social worker with 3 months savings, buying a one-way ticket to start over, moving my son across state lines for better opportunities. Those aren't all perfect decisions, but they were my choices, right? And I had to deal with those consequences of those choices. And some consequences aren't bad consequences, some of them are positive, right? And so, again, there's no like negative, bad, good kind of thing, but not every decision I made was perfect, but they gave me the feedback that I needed to figure out the next thing, then the next thing, and it just keeps going from there. And so, what I learned over time, again, there is no perfect decision, like that just doesn't exist, right? But there is such a thing as a decision that's true to who you are. And when you make those, everything becomes figure outable, as Marie Forleo would say. If you know Marie Forleo, she wrote a book called Figure Outable. And you can just figure everything is, you can just figure everything out along the way, right? So when I see you struggling to make a decision, unable to move forward, I totally get it. I've been there, but I also know there's always a way through. And it's just believing that there is something on the other side of that fear. There's something on the other side of that decision. All right. And okay, so if the old way of deciding is basically asking your scared inner child to plan your adult life, what actually works? And here's what I've learned after years of just helping people through these sort of impossible choices. You just have to change the question, just like I did earlier with that question we asked in the beginning. Tony Robbins says, there's this quote by him that I always like to use. And he says that he can tell the quality of your life by the quality of your questions. And he's absolutely right. Most people are stuck because they're asking questions that worked for their old life, but don't work for who they're becoming. So, learning to shift those questions over time gives you a lot deeper clarity of how to move forward. And instead of asking, what should I do? Which sends you straight back into your head, right? Where all of the shoulds live, all the fears, they live up here. all in the head. We need to ask what wants to come through me. And look, I get it. That seems a little esoteric. It seems a little woo woo, but stay with me. This is absolutely super practical. And so, what we call intuition, it's just your unconscious mind processing more data than your thinking brain ever could. But here's the thing, again, you're not just making a decision, you're choosing who you become next, right? So every choice is like you're casting a vote for a future version of yourself, right? So, um, for example, if like I always use this working out because it's easy. And but if you are somebody who would like to, be in better health, and so whatever decision you make that day, whether it's like, the cheeseburger that's dripping with the delicious grease, you choose something that might be less greasy, right? Because you're building that future self, right? And so it's thinking through that lens and feeling through that lens that allows you to feel a bit more comfortable making that decision. Again, you're not going to feel like 100%, but 60, 70, you could work with that kind of percentage. So I'm going to give you three ways to kind of cut through the noise and actually hear what your authentic self is saying. And think of these as maybe three different languages your deeper self can actually speak. Now, um, if you're feeling any kind of resistance in sort of trying any of these ideas, or even any resistance currently in your life, which is totally normal, I do have a free mini course that kind of walks you through working with that resistance, and the link is in the description below. But there are three compass points that I always encourage people to explore. Let me drink some water and check in the chat. And let me know if this is resonating. Let me know if you've tried some of this stuff before and if it's worked out or how it worked. I always feel like things work out. Maybe not in the way that we desire it to be, but they work. They work in their own mysterious way, I believe. All right, so the first compass point, again, your body is way smarter than your brain. Lean towards the body. Of course, you come back to the brain, but lean towards the body. Again, your nervous system processes information like so much faster than your conscious mind. It knows the answer actually before your brain even finishes asking the question, right? Somebody can ask you a question, you immediately have a reaction before you actually speak. So it's like noticing when you're in that space. So here's what you do, you close your eyes and you actually step into each choice, whatever that is. So we'll just use the job example. Don't just think about taking the job, right? Imagine what your first day would look like. Feel your feet kind of like literally walking through those doors. What happens to your body, right? Does your chest open up, or does it kind of like shut down? When I was deciding to quit my job as a social worker, to start something completely unknown, the second I imagined he handed that resignation letter, man, my entire body was just like, dang, it just exhaled, right? Like I'd been holding my breath for like years, okay? Now, was I terrified? Absolutely. Like I didn't know anybody else who quit their jobs. Like my aunts and them, like everybody had jobs like 20, 25 years, right? That was the era that I lived in, where people work one job, maybe two jobs, and they stayed all the way through. So it was out of the ordinary to quit a job, especially the way that I did it. But what I realized is that even feeling that excitement of handing in my resignation letter, excitement and fear are identical twins in your body. So same racing heart, same surge of adrenaline. Your brain is the only thing that decides which story to tell, right? And so when my boss's boss offered me like promotion, even offered me to work in a different department where I didn't have to do as much work and I'd make a little bit more money, I just imagined staying made me feel like I was shrinking, right? Like someone was slowly turning down the volume on my life. And I just can't do it. I can't, I gotta go. I gotta go. And I don't know where I'm going, but I have to go. And so here's what I tell every client. Again, your body speaks in expansion and contraction. So pay attention to what makes you feel bigger versus what makes you feel smaller. Okay. And so that is your inner wisdom telling you the difference between fear that protects and fear that points you towards growth. Okay. Remember, they both share the same energy, but it's the story, right? The meaning we place behind that feeling. And let me know if this is resonating with y'all. Um, all right. So the second compass point, your energy doesn't lie. And I'm not talking about whether you're tired or caffeinated. I'm talking about your life force. What feeds you versus what slowly starves it. Okay. And you know this feeling. There are people who sort of walk into a room and instantly you feel more alive. Then others suck the air out of the space before you even speak. You're just like, "Ugh, I gotta go. I can't be here." And so that's not a coincidence, right? That's your energy. That's your energy system giving you more information. And so it's important to kind of like notice that, right? And not override that system. I had this client, I probably talked about it before, but she's just like a really good example. She's a daughter of immigrants, really great grades in high school, did all the things. She was like literally the family golden child, right? She represented everything that her family sacrificed for. And she looked really successful from the outside. But on the inside, she was slowly losing bits and pieces of herself and found herself and was in what felt like a permanent funk. When I met her, she was just in this like just funk and just kind of like burnt out with life. And at first, we thought it was maybe work, it was, just other things. But when we started just tracking like her energy and just really paying attention, we discovered something really interesting. Every single decision she made was filtered through one question: will this make my family proud? Right? She never once asked, will this make me feel alive? And you know what actually energized her? What we found out was like, just it was really simple things. It was like the silence, slow mornings, painting, turning down social invitations all throughout high school, college, and most of her adult life. Her social calendar was full. I mean, she was the plug, right? The person everyone wanted to hang out with her. You had to like schedule a date on the calendar. It could be months before you hung out with her. It was that kind of life. But what felt energizing to her was turning down some of those social invitations and retreating from all that because she was becoming somebody different in this next chapter of her life. And things that felt selfish or even unproductive to her family and her friends, you know, that felt energizing for her. And so her soul was literally starving for permission to just be. There comes a point in your life where you really just want to be. Like you don't want to be here, you don't want to be there, you don't all those things that used to energize you, it often changes over time. And because it changes over time, your decision making and how you approach decisions are going to change over time because what used to fuel it isn't anymore. And so it's important to kind of notice those subtle shifts. And often they're not so subtle. It's just like we have a hard time, noticing them. They speak pretty loudly sometimes, but we just kind of like we override them. Even though inside we feel the difference, we make a different decision that's not congruent to how we're feeling. So here's your homework. Love giving out homework for 1 week. Just track your energy, like your life depends on it, right? Because it kind of does, right? Especially if you want to, begin moving forward towards the life that you truly desire. After every decision, every conversation, maybe every activity, ask yourself this one question: am I more alive right now? Am I slowly fading? Right? And just check in and see what happens and see how those decisions change over time just by that one little question. Okay. All right. We're at the last compass point here. All right. I know I mentioned your future self earlier, but there's a different way to do this. The third one is checking in with your future self. Now, this isn't about predicting the future, it's more about tapping into the part of you that already knows what you need. Sometimes I sit with clients, they'll ask me a question, And I don't really say anything because they know. Okay. They just want me to say, to give them permission or something. And I'm like, that's not even, that's not what I'm here to do. You already know the answer to that question. You do, you do, you do. All right. So stop frying. You know the answer to that question. We usually know already. Okay. We just want confirmation. But here's how this works. You just sit quietly and imagine yourself maybe a few years from now. All right. Not the perfect version, but the one that's really authentic, the one that has gone through the things, the hard stuff, all the wisdom that you learned the hard way, and just look at them and in the eyes. You can do this in the mirror too. I always recommend do it in the mirror and ask, what did this choice teach you about who you really are? Whatever choice you're trying to make, what will it teach you, right? And what did you wish you'd known? And what are you most grateful for? When we think it through that future lens, it helps you connect more into that feeling and that decision. It helps you connect to not the surface level you, but the deeper you, the one that really knows what is the next step. And so the client I mentioned, when she did this exercise, something incredible happened. She realized she didn't need any 5-year plan because she was so used to I mean, she predicted her whole life to the T, and everything that she ever wanted actually materialized. But again, there was a discrepancy there with her feelings, right? I think I'm moving a little slow, but I hope not. Anyway, um, she just needed permission to just stop performing and start living. For somebody who grew up performing her entire life, she had to just learn to not do that. And so when she finally made the decision from truth instead of duty, everything shifted, right? I mean, everything just got lighter, and she was just no longer in that funk anymore because for the first time in years, she actually felt free. And of course, it wasn't easy. It was uncomfortable because you have to say no to people, right? That calendar is turning off and you're pulling away from people who was literally kind of like sucking your energy out, right? And so that whole part was uncomfortable. Having those hard conversations with people was uncomfortable. Talking to friends and letting them know that these friendships were shifting and changing because she was shifting and changing, that was uncomfortable. But living her truth was what kind of dropped all the chains, right? And so maybe that's you right now. Um, and the more that we avoid some of those hard conversations, the harder it is for us to be as authentic as we would like. And so here's what I want you to remember: your future self isn't some fantasy version of you. They're the person who had the courage to honor what was true, right? Even when it was scary. And they're just waiting for you to take the first step. They're like over here, like, come on, when they gonna get here? All right. They're waiting for you. They're just waiting for you to just take that first brave step. Okay. And so these three compass points work when everything else may not seem like they're working. And because they access parts of your intelligence that your rational brain, that has never even met, right? And so your body's ancient wisdom, right? Your energies, truth detector, your future self's clarity, all those things are working together to make sense of all the things. So it's not certainty that you need, okay? We, we want to move away from, I need to know, I need to know, okay? Uh, and this is how you sort of begin to build that self trust, right? So again, this isn't about finding the right answer according to maybe your parents, your partner, or even society's expectations. This is about finding your answer, right? The one that serves your soul and not your safety. So just keep that in mind, okay? If it feels safe, we want to wiggle out of that comfort zone, all right? Let me know if that is resonating, or if you're somebody who has a tendency to be on working within the confines of safety and comfort. And let me know if you're willing to work outside of that safety and comfort. All right. And here's something that no one tells you about authentic decisions. Again, they don't feel safe, they just feel true. And when something is true for you, your whole system feels it. Okay. It begins to feel good. right? And it actually feels pretty grounding when you're in that place. So safe keeps you comfortable, but true changes everything. Okay. So it's like checking in with yourself. Where in what areas of my life can I just be a little bit more true, a little bit more honest? And I know this can be hard because part of the truth is the accountability piece. And I find that even for myself back in the day, like in order for you to be true and to take that um, accountability, it's going to ask something of you. And a lot of people have a hard time with being responsible to self in that capacity because then that means you are being expected to show up a different way, your own expectations. I mean, not for other people, but there's a sense of responsibility that comes with authenticity. And that kind of responsibility is scary to people, especially if you're not accustomed to taking full accountability for your life in all areas. And that can be pretty scary. Okay. Kenya says, wriggling out of the safety zone. Yeah, bit by bit, but we finna get there. But bit by bit, we'll get there. Something I want you to keep in mind is that, your soul did not come here to blend in. It came here to stand out, to express something that only exists when you're being completely you. And so these compass points, they're not just decision making tools, they're really your roadmap to just come back to yourself bit by bit. We do a little at a time, and eventually we become more whole, more integrated, much more of ourselves. Okay. And that's what I hope for all of you. All right. So some of you might be thinking, it's not just what if I'm wrong? It might be even deeper. It's, what if I trust this voice inside me and it ends up costing me everything? Remember, I talked about that responsibility thing. And this is exactly why decisions feel impossible. Again, it's not just the fear of making the wrong choice, it's the fear that your authentic desires are somehow dangerous, right? That being fully yourself feels too much, too risky, too selfish. And so you've been trained to see your authentic desires as problems to solve instead of wisdom to follow, right? So to treat your deepest knowing like it's the enemy of your own expansion. Like we've really been conditioned to not trust that, right? So now when something feels genuinely right for you, that old programming begins to kick in. And then we start saying things, oh, this is way too good to be true. I don't trust it. There's got to be a catch. And I did a whole video about why your brain rejects joy. Sometimes people say smart people don't follow their hearts, they follow logic. So if you have that story spinning, you can see how and where your decisions come from. You can see how you can get caught in that analysis paralysis. But here's what I've learned from just doing this work for years: that it's not that you're not afraid of making the wrong decision. You're afraid that what you really want might actually be possible. And so that possibility, it requires you to remember who you really are underneath all of that conditioning. And so sometimes it's the possibility that's a lot scarier than the actual fear. Because if you do make it, what does that mean? Again, that responsibility. I'll have to step into that responsibility to continue this train forward, right? And so that pull you feel towards something that scares you, that's just your authentic self recognizing an opportunity for growth that your comfort zone just can't give you. It just can't. All right. Let me know how that lands for you in the comments. But the biggest risk isn't following your intuition and failing. The biggest risk is playing it so safe that you never find out what you're truly capable of. Like you just never meet that edge. And it's meeting that edge that really changes everything, right? It reminds me of this quote by Marianne Williamson. Maybe you've heard it. It says, our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. So we ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented, fabulous? Actually, who are you not to be? You're a child of God. and your playing small does not serve the world. I always remember that quote whenever I'm feeling a little nervous about something, right? Let me know what you think about that quote. Have you heard that quote before? Let me know. All right, so we've covered the three compass points: your body's wisdom, your energy's truth, and your own future self's guidance. These give you a way to make decisions that actually align with who you're becoming. And but here's the thing though, right? Knowing this stuff doesn't change anything. Like we get all the knowledge. I know this stuff. But practicing, we got to practice some of this stuff, right? Practicing is what changes everything. And here's how to start without overwhelming yourself. And, don't try this with like your biggest life decision. When I think about the compass points, when I mentioned that to you, it's like trying to deadlift 300 pounds when you go to the gym. Like, don't start with like the big one, okay? Because that can feel a little too much. Your inner compass needs reps if you've actually been ignoring it for years. So you start small and you build the muscle. Micro action, right? So you start with what to eat when you're standing in front of the fridge. You make that decision quick, or when you're at the restaurant. Whether to scroll for 10 more minutes or actually go to bed. Make the decision quick. You get a text, deciding which text to deserve your energy right now. Make that decision real quick. So these aren't trivial choices, they're trust building activities, right? Every time you pause and check in, you're sending a message to your nervous system. Hey, I'm listening to you now. And you can speak up. Tell me what you need, okay? And I will listen. And once a week, you review. Where did I choose from fear this week? Where did I choose from what felt true? And you're literally watching yourself come back to life the more that you do this over time. And when you do these kinds of check ins with yourselves over and over, you build that confidence, right? You begin to strengthen that self trust. And some people are like, it's not working. And it's like a week. Okay. If you've been doing this for like 30, 40, 50 years, give yourself a little bit of time. All right. You're literally rewiring patterns in your brain. You're rewiring behaviors. You're repatterning things. So it might take a little time. All right. So be give yourself some grace. Because what's happening is that you're not just making better decisions, you're becoming someone who doesn't need everyone else's approval to know what's right for them. And that just changes everything. Okay. And so if you're ready to stop overthinking and trust yourself, just let me know in the comments because it's time to build that trust, that self trust muscle. Okay. All right. Here's what I want you to remember as we wrap up. Every decision feels impossible because you're not just choosing what to do, you're caught between the voice that says, stay safe, and that little tiny voice that says, what if? Okay. And here's the thing that changes everything: stop trying to pick a side, right? Both voices are giving you intel. Your cautious one, your cautious side has kept you alive this long, right? It has kept you safe for a really long time. We want to honor that because it did a really good job. But now your adventurous side is showing you what is possible. And a lot of people will tell you to choose, but my recommendation is to not choose. I want you to listen, observe, and notice and check in with what it's trying to tell you, right? You're literally trying to make decisions while your sense of self is like in upgrade mode. Okay. So let me know in the chat if that connects with you because I want you to know that this struggle that you're having with making these decisions means you're outgrowing something. Okay. You're outgrowing always feeling and outgrowing in general always feels uncomfortable before it actually begins to feel freeing, like you're creating more space in your life. So it's just getting over that little hump of discomfort so you can reap the benefits of all that courage. All right. So the secret isn't in the silencing of the scared voice or ignoring the excited one, it's learning to translate between them. Right. That is the key. Okay. And if you want help with that exact process, again, I created this mini course called How to Finally Get Unstuck Without Becoming Someone You're Not. It's really specifically for people who are tired of second guessing themselves, but don't want to become completely different in the process. Links in the description. Um, and just get on the wait list for that. It's coming out in about a week or two. And for those that want to go all in, the resistance reset, where you build self trust without letting fear and overthinking hold you back. It's an 8-week live coaching journey for self aware people ready to take aligned action and stop overthinking. We start in September 15th. But honestly, start with a free course, get on the wait list. It'll show you exactly where you are and what you need next. All right, so next week, we're diving into how one aligned choice can create a domino effect in your life and why decisions that change everything often look kind of boring from the outside. Everyone always harps on the big decisions, but there's some small ones that could actually create a ripple effect and change everything. So here's your takeaway: decision paralysis isn't a personal failing. So don't beat yourself up. Don't get too hard on yourself. It's just your intelligence recognizing that you're at this crossroad that's pretty important. And so your confusion is actually clarity in disguise, right? So try those 3 compass points this week. Let me know in the chat that you're actually going to do this, not just think about it. Come back and share it with me. Okay. And remember, you already have everything you need to make decisions that honor both your safety and your dreams. Okay. So if this resonated with you, hit that subscribe button and turn on the notifications so you don't miss the rest of the series. We're just getting started on this journey of learning, how to trust yourself again, and share this with someone who you think might be on the same exact journey as you. And as always, thank you for watching. Thank you for being here with me tonight. For those who are live, I really appreciate y'all. And I will see you on the other side of change. All right. Have a good night or a good morning wherever you are in the world. Take care, everybody.